From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building dreams with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success, we're here to inspire the quest. Dog tags to ownership, we're the best. Take the prize.
From the battlefield to the boardroom, this is Dog Tags to Ownership, the podcast where veterans share their journeys from serving our nation to leading in business. Hear inspiring stories of grit, growth, and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives those who've served to succeed. Tune in and take the first step toward your own mission in entrepreneurship.
Military One Percenters, welcome to Dog Tags to Ownership, where once a week we interview veterans who charted a path towards entrepreneurship. Our goals are to share resources, advice, and success stories about starting a business, discuss strategies for building financial independence and creating your own path, and most importantly, build a community to support each other through the challenges of transitioning from service life to civilian ownership. This week on the podcast, we're going to bring in somebody a little bit different, Gregory Povenski. Gregory is a current PhD candidate student at Oklahoma State with a concentration in entrepreneurship through acquisition. For those of you who don't know, entrepreneurship through acquisition is utilizing private equity to help back you to build or to buy a business that someone else had already owned. So someone who has either had the business for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, is retiring, but they help you buy those businesses through acquisition. And that's what Gregory is going to come on and talk to us today, and how you can utilize ETA to help you get after your entrepreneurship goals as you get out of the military or currently already out of the military and still have an itch to want to get into entrepreneurship. So a lot of great information that he provides on ETA and what it is and how you can do that. And there's some great programs out there that you can utilize to help you learn more about ETA after you listen to this podcast. To introduce our guest to the show today, Gregory Povenski, a U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, prior CEO of Voyager Space, and a PhD student with a focus on entrepreneurship through acquisition. Gregory, welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us today to discuss your journey. How are you?
I'm good. Julie, Matt, thanks for having me. Good to talk to you guys again. Real quick clarification, I was the CEO of one of the small portfolio companies in Voyager. So before Matt or Dylan hear this and start calling me on the phone, being like, telling people you took my job. But yeah, so great to be here. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking about all those things.
Awesome. Yeah. Could you just start and tell us a little bit about yourself and your military service?
Yeah, so 23 total years, enlisted out of high school, got out, did the Green and Gold program, came back, initially an artillery officer. Went to selection in 2001. I was actually in selection when the Rangers jumped into Rhino, so that was very sobering. You know, I went in the selection a couple days after, about a week after the towers had fallen, and so while we're there, the war kind of kicked off. So very sobering experience because we knew everybody was going to, basically the instructors pulled us out in the formation, like, hey, we're going to the show. So if this isn't for you, get out. And then got to spend the rest of my career in Special Forces, 7th Group team leader, 5th Group company command. I commanded the free fall school out in Arizona. Retired basically out of ROTC at University of Michigan as an instructor. I went on, got my MBA, and then went in the civilian sector, and I've done a couple things since then.
So you were an ROTC instructor, your final job. Were you the PMS for the University of Michigan?
No, I actually showed up there as a major. I made 05 while I was there, so it was kind of a weird experience in that way. Like there's 2 05s there, so but it was a great experience. I highly recommend anybody that's looking to, if you know that kind of that 04, 05 is your terminal level, like that's a great place to go end your career because you get to put a fingerprint on the next generation of leaders. And on top of it, you get to, take advantage of some educational opportunity, which is what I did.
Are you from Michigan, or how'd you end up at U of M? Just that was an opportunity that was in your year group?
When I was coming out of command, so I got I was a company commander, 5th Group. There were some issues out at Yuma. I got voluntold to go to Yuma and command the free fall school. And as I was coming out of that command, they gave me a whole bunch of options. And literally the last one my branch guy read off to me was, I got this slot. And I was like, that's the one I want. I don't think he was real happy about that, but I went anyway. It was a great, like I said, great experience. I'm not from there originally from the Philadelphia area. My son likes to frequently, he was born in Michigan. He likes to frequently remind me that he's from Michigan. So it's okay if he roots for the Detroit Lions and not the Eagles. But, we'll talk about that as he gets older for sure.
Yeah, I'm a Michigan State grad, so I was just curious.
Is that what really triggered you into getting for your transition and getting your MBA while you were there? Did you know that when you got out, you wanted to get into business ownership or entrepreneurship?
So I knew I wanted to go get more schooling. I was very lucky to get selected and go to the Navy War College while I was a major for my ILE. I'm so super lucky to get to do that. And then so I knew I wanted to go do some more schooling. I found out about these executive MBA programs. Wound up applying in Michigan. Some issues there. Long story. So I, in spite, basically applied to every program that outranked Michigan. I wound up getting into Northwestern, which was no. So I really, not to sound hokey, I do believe a lot of things happen for a reason, right? And Kellogg was the right. In fact, when I interviewed at Kellogg, I walked out of the interview. I applied to a couple schools at that point: Penn, Kellogg, and NYU, Columbia. My interview, which was the first one I had from all those, I called my wife, said, "Hey, if I don't get in here, I'm not going anywhere." Like it was just felt right. So I went to Kellogg, had an amazing experience, absolutely fantastic group of individuals in my cohort. There was 2 other Green Berets in there, former Green Berets. So it was kind of weird. You go around the 60-some person group. I think there was 66 of us to start. These 2 guys introduced themselves, and finally it gets to me, and I was like, well, they don't say there's a lot of us, but there's, 2 of us, 2 other more of them sitting here. So both first group guys. So I kind of forgave them for that. But so I had a great experience there. Had an amazing set of professors, and it was really Mitchell Peterson, my finance professor, that kind of started pushing me towards private equity space based on kind of what I wanted to do and where he felt like my skill set fit. I didn't really get into the ETA thing till I left. I was in a captive fund private equity for a while. And then I really started looking at, I had some friends that were doing ETA. I started looking at it. And then when I got to my PhD program, didn't want to be an entrepreneurship guy initially when I went in there. I thought I was going to be a strategy guy. An amazing professor who is now my dissertation chair. His class was amazing. And I just fell in love with it and started, I brought up the idea of like, hey, there's this search fund thing out there, not a lot of research about it. And that's how this latest project got started.
And Greg, just to back up for a minute, if I can you talk about, 23 years, that decision to retire from the military? Was that an easy decision? Was that a difficult one for you with where you were at in life? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it was pyramid to go from 03 to well beyond 05 in the special forces is very tight, right? And I think that a lot of guys are ordained very early on, and I knew I wasn't on that track, right? So I was lucky to make 05. I was very fortunate, happy to do that. I knew that there was no 06 in Greg's future when I got promoted to 05. And so it was okay. I came to that realization, I could have stayed a little bit longer based on the allowable time in service based on my rank. But I had, 2 really good officers, one when I was enlisted that I worked for, and then one when I was one of my battalion commanders at 5th Group, who's now the SOC your commander, 1-star, who both told me, hey, Greg, you'll know when it's time. And I kind of, at ROTC, I could see the direction the military was going. I knew there was really no more cool jobs for Greg to go do. So they weren't going to let me jump out of a lot more airplanes and stuff like that. So I'd done all that cool stuff. So I just knew, I literally, when I came out in the 05 list, I was already getting ready to retire at that point anyway. And I talked to my wife. I said, hey, I'll stay just to keep the rank and the pension type thing. I'm at ROTC. It's a good gig, but I knew there was nothing past that. So, it was an easy decision for me to make because I was self-actualized to realize that I am not going to be a general. So yeah, it's very easy.
Any big takeaways from like your transition process? It was, you said, about 6 years ago now. Anything that sticks out that, you could share with our listeners that, went well or didn't go well, or, just from that TAP experience?
Yeah, so I asked, for whatever reason, in their infinite logic, the Army moved me for my last year. So I wound up doing my last year at Fort Leavenworth at kind of a stash of, useless O5 away in a corner somewhere, giving PowerPoint slides to make. So the TAP program, I didn't get a lot out of that. I felt like that's no fault of the Army. I think they struggle with that. I do think the biggest lesson I learned from my transition is it's hard to, everybody says there's a plan. I felt like I had a really good plan. I knew what I wanted to go do. I just completed this very high caliber MBA. I put a lot of stock into that, getting me into the places I wanted to go work, but every plan, like Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan, you get punched in the mouth, right? So that started not working. So I think having a backup plan and a backup to that backup plan is a good idea for any veterans. I do know the Army's gotten a lot better. Like SkillBridge was kind of in its infancy when I got out. I would highly recommend anybody taking advantage of that if you get a chance. I mean, you're silly not to. I think that the communities like you guys are building and you have, and I think a lot of veterans or eyes are like, I didn't know. If you would ask me that last year at Leavenworth what ETA was, I'd have been like, yeah, it's when I get to a place, right? Like I would have not known anything about that. I think that education is out there. I would definitely take advantage of any educational opportunity you can get. And I would say that it's getting more support from the Army, which I think is, or the military in general, which I think is great, right? I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy in the military. We don't help people. And then you layer on that being a soft guy, and there's all this one mythology you got to kind of cut through that's just not true, right? And then two, there's like, you can't really, people don't really understand what you do, and they've seen one too many movies. And so I think some of that too, like being able to explain that better would have been something I would have,
No, I appreciate that.
but any military person that's had any kind of leadership, and again, I think this is where we do a very poor job of explaining to the civilian sector what military veterans do, right? There's very few jobs in the world where a 22-year-old kid is handed 30 people to be in charge of and say, hey, go, right? I mean, when you look at a PL in any branch, really, they've got this, whether it's small detachment that they're in charge of, if they're a EOD or MI guy or guy or gal or an infantry platoon leader. I was a FIST team chief, fire support officer when I first went in the artillery. I had like an 8-man team. And I don't think the civilian sector understands when you say, hey, I was in charge of all these people. When I was at Yuma, I wrote 107 NCOERs or letters of input, depending, because it was a joint command, right? So, but not only do you manage their day-to-day activities, their professional education, you deal with their families, you deal with their health issues. Julie's battalion commander, she can definitely, get more deeper into this than I can. I don't have that level of experience, but, I think she'll agree that, and not to put words in your mouth, Julie, but I think you would agree that you're just so deep into their life that any military person has that ability to if you take that, just little nuggets of that, and can transfer that over to search fund or an ETA or something like that, or the private equity space where I work in, you're going to do so much better than your peers there because they've never led people. So I think that is it does get me passionate and a little fired up because I think the civilian sector doesn't understand that ability. You can train it, obviously, because we do train it, but it takes a special kind of individual to train them to do it. So now you've got somebody that's already done it. Why are you not taking more advantage of that? So that's part of my mission with doing what I do now. I want to be that strong advocate that says, hey, here are all these things that make good business owners and good PE guys and good mergers and acquisitions. And, here's what makes Julie a great business owner. Oh, by the way, all the military people have all this. It's already there. So just go grab it. In my mind, they should be outside of Fort Bragg with a net, and every person that's retiring or getting out, they should just be capturing them and throwing them in the back of a van and being like, all right, let's go.
It's like old school.
Yeah, exactly.
What drew you, I guess, like what got you so interested in ETA? So it's entrepreneurship through acquisition for those listeners and followers. I don't know what it stands for, but what got you drawn to ETA and put you on the path to where you are now?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me was I went to, like I said, captive fund private equity is an operating partner. And there's all these pressures that come with a fund like that. Like you've got to deploy capital, you've got an investment horizon, and I think it makes, my research shows it makes a lot of artificiality into the system that is decisions that you shouldn't have to make. Whereas I think with ETA, the biggest advantage is if you've got a good fund that's backing you, or if you're a self-funded searcher, whichever one you are, if you've got a good fund that's backing you and you find a solid business, you don't have any pressure to exit. There's no return on investment per se, right? A smart ETA fund should not be doing that, right? Because when you look at the data, people that recognize about 11% of searchers that recognize a return make above a 10x ROI. But the average time to do that is between 7.2 and 10.3 years. So when you put that artificiality onto the ETA holding, like a PE firm does, looking for that return, ruins you. So if you look at, say, hey, you sell it in the normal 6-7 year holding period, those people are recognizing X and below. So you don't want to have that. So I think ETA is interesting in that it gives you the opportunity. If you've got a solid business and it's cash flowing and you're doing well, you can kind of hold it as long as you want on those. I mean, obviously that your investors are going to want an exit event of some kind, but you're not forced into that, very tight time frame that you promised your LPs.
As you've been doing your research and looking at this, when you worked with Full Bore Capital and got into that, what are they really
They're a lower middle
backing?
market. They were a lower middle market PE firm. They've since wind down the fund, so they're no longer activating.
So they were a private equity fund, going after the strategy of ETA in some way, shape, or form. How I somewhat understand that
They were like a private equity fund, but they were going after smaller acquisitions. Not quite the ETA model, but they were like lower, they were like micro cap firms. They were really kind of going after. So the very low end of the lower middle market, right? But they were still had some like higher EBITDA thresholds and higher revenue thresholds that they were than a search fund would normally have. Now we can talk about how that's changed now in the future. I've got some research around that as well, but that's what they were doing.
Yeah, and so is that like and I'd just like to know more about how do you see it now with your research and entrepreneurship through acquisition, especially for veterans and utilizing private equity to get after ETA? Is that something that you see as something that the veterans or military members who want to get into entrepreneurship, something that they should pursue? Or what does the data say on that?
So, the first thing I would say is it's exploded, right? From what it started at, started at Harvard, Stanford's really kind of grabbed onto it, and they've become kind of the center of the universe around academic research around ETA and teaching it and being a big force within it. But I would say that people, veterans, right? I would look for a funded search because it's exploded. You've got funds that just invest in searchers. It's all they do. So that's a great place to start. And I would also say it depends highly on like, what do you do as you get out? Like if you're like me, you're retired. I didn't really need a job. Like I have a pension. I can kind of take my time. So you can do the self-funded search that way and then build up your investor base as far as like you can take the deals to different funds then. And sometimes that's better for you because you recognize a little bit better economics because they didn't pay for your initial search. So now you've got some leverage to say, hey, look, you didn't give me that $500,000 starter fund. I want to negotiate some better economics. It makes sense for veterans to go after these things because like I said before, with the leadership ability, I think they make good candidates to go out and find good businesses and work on good businesses. I think the danger as we progress in the future is because there's so much undeployed capital sitting in the captive private equity world, you're going to see lower middle market funds push towards targets that were normally the realm of ETA. A little bit smaller, not quite as much revenue, not quite as much EBITDA. And you're going to find lower middle market PE firms that have to go find these targets because they've got to deploy that capital, right? So they're going to put some upward pricing pressure on the targets that ETA individuals would normally go after.
What's the typical hold period for acquisition? ETA. Is there a hold period that's like an average for those companies?
Yeah, so it depends on like what return level you're looking at, but you see it anywhere from about firms that have exited, searchers that have exited, on the low end, they're at 4.9 years. So they've had an exit. At the high end, we're at that 10.3. So that's kind of the band that you're looking at. So you're looking to hold it about 5 years to 10 years. Most PE firms are a 7-year period. I think that's all situationally dependent too, right? Like you could get one of these things and it could take off. And 3 years later, you got some crazy offer for it. You can't turn it down, right? And then, or the opposite could happen. You could get something and it's such a slow drip because it's an industry that's hard to build in, but it's successful, and that could take you a little bit longer. Anywhere between that like 5-year to 10-year period is really what you should program out.
And then how much are you looking at success rates, I guess, of those companies that are acquired? and then grown and then sold.
Yeah, so Stanford does a really good job tracking funded search. And one of their biggest piece of data, and where my last project on ETA started, was we looked at this chart that they made, and only about 43% of people that start search recognize a return. And how you get to that number is about 2/3 actually make an acquisition. So you got about 1/3 that just falls out, never even buys a business for whatever reason. And then once you get into that, you got about 2/3 of the people that make an acquisition actually recognize a return. So that's where you get your 43%. So it's basically a coin flip. The reason this project that I'm doing right now, that I'm doing it, is because I was like, that's got to be better. How do we make it better? Unfortunately, what I looked at is not the key to that success. But we can talk about that in a little bit. I think that's something to keep in mind, though. It's hard to buy a business. One out of every 3 people is not going to be able to buy a business for whatever reason. They can't get investors to back them. They can't. I think most of it, I don't have the exact stratification of the data, but most of it is they can't find a business that people want to fund. Too small, too risky, low barrier to entry industry, stuff like that. So I think those are things that hurt them. And then the other part that people forget about buying a business is you got to talk the seller into selling you their business. And a lot of times you're dealing with somebody who built a business from nothing. It's their baby. They've owned it. I use landscaping a lot because that's one of the things I worked on in Cobor, but I make the argument that nobody started a landscaping business thinking they were going to get a $20 million check for it. They did it because they wanted to be their own boss, make enough money to buy their new Chevy Silverado, F-150, whatever they prefer, every 2 years, and wanted to go hunting and fishing or hiking or biking, travel, whatever they wanted to do. Is basically fund their lifestyle. So it becomes a lifestyle business. And then you get this wave of investment activity, and all of a sudden now their business is worth a lot. So there's some of that going on. And then there's just some people that don't want to sell it to anybody. There's some people that are going to give it to their kids. There's some people that have this poorly informed, the evil of PA and private equity, because it is a type of private equity. This ill and bad taste in their mouth. Oh, PE comes in and destroys businesses, which the research shows that's not true. Actually, industries with heavy PE tend to create jobs faster and more of them. So you got to convince somebody to sell you their business, though. So I think that's the other part that military veterans can you're used to communicating a mission. You can communicate to the seller, like, here's my mission, here's where I want to take this, here's where I want to go, this is what we're going to do with your business. And I think and I also think military mentors, especially in like these blue collar businesses that tend to be the target that people go after. I do think, this is totally anecdotal, guess by Greg, I have no data for this, but I do think they relate a little bit more to those people just in general, right? Because the most of the military is a bunch of blue collar guys and gals that grew up. You don't have a lot of fellas sign up to be in the military. Chris Hilton's never going to basic training. So I think you have an advantage there as a veteran as well.
That'd be a good reality show, though.
Yeah, it would be. So I guess, Greg, so with your research, you've been tailoring it to the military community, looking at their entrepreneurship through acquisition. Through your research, have you found, like, what are the best businesses out there for our listeners or followers who want to get into ETA? What are some of the best businesses for them to look at, to be able to buy and go after?
So I'll tell you a secret. I don't specifically in my research say veteran because I don't want to bias my survey sample. My intent is to backdoor my way into it. So by that, I mean, like, do all this research, figure out, like, hey, here's these things that make a good operator, and then be able to say, oh, by the way, military people meet 90% of these things. I would say the best, it's hard to say the best industry or business. Most of these acquisitions do occur in the blue collar services type, electrical, HVAC, landscaping. They do occur in those businesses. You're starting to see more search funds in the healthcare and SaaS business. If you have experience at that as a veteran some way, somehow, those are definitely worth exploring. But I think I would stay in something that's kind of a simple industry to learn. And by that, I mean, you don't have to know how to code in order to talk about the business, right? Because I don't think a lot of veterans come out of the military with the ability to do that, or they don't have a lot of exposure to healthcare on the whole, right? Obviously, there's jobs in the military where you're going to get some healthcare exposure. I would stick to that industry, those like those blue collar type service industries, work within that realm. Plus, there's some government stuff you can do out there. There's some security company stuff. I do think if you're going to get into computers, cyber is a good place for the military veterans to fall into, just from the security standpoint. I think in general, though, it's kind of wide open with your personal opinion, right? And I do think as you go to get out, part of that plan should be, if you are going to do ETA, if you know before you get out you're going to do ETA, you should take advantage of some educational opportunities while you're in to learn, whether it's go get a certificate in, some kind of SaaS, or get a certificate in AI or something like that. So you at least have some ability to know what you're dealing with, because there's a lot of research around, do investors back, the horse, the jockey, or the trainer? And a lot of the research comes down to the horse, which is the business. But also the jockey is key too. So they're gonna put a lot of faith into that operator's ability to operate.
I think that's a great analogy. So I'll be honest, I didn't really know anything about ETA until we talked to Jerry. And then after that had Patrick Flood on, president of Owners in Honor. And so now we've learned a lot about ETA. But is there any other things out there that people can do research on to understand more about entrepreneurship through acquisition? I know Owners in Honor, they help veterans who want to get into that space by signing up, and we talked about that on our podcast. But is there anything else out there that for veterans that can help them get into the ETA space?
So there's a lot of online communities you can get into. Searchfunder.com is one that you can get on and start kind of reading blogs. Acquiring Minds is another podcast that talks a lot about ETA. But so I think there's a lot of that free side stuff out there. And I also think if they do want to go, if a veteran is going to get out and go to school, whether that's an MBA program or they don't have their bachelor's yet, most colleges now have an ETA club at them. That's definitely something I would look at going to. And you can Google search. There's a bunch of conferences every year around these things. I am a big advocate of reaching out to people, whether it's on LinkedIn or some kind of networking site where you just say, hey, look, I want to learn more about this. I think I found in the ETA community, people are happy to talk about ETA. They want to talk more about it. They're very passionate about it. So I think that's another good source as well.
Does any of your research or have any of your studies, I guess, led you down any type of comparison with like franchise ownership for any like comparative data? I don't know if that's a curveball.
Specifically, no, but I think when you look at franchise models, they're a lot like, unless it's like, Chick-fil-A is kind of a weird one, so you kind of take that out of the mix. They're a lot like just buying another business of any other kind, right? I think you should have some QSR experience of some kind before you get into that. I would be awful at running a McDonald's, as an example, right? Or if you go beyond the food franchising, you get into some of these other businesses, a lot of them are super veteran friendly, which is great because they're providing you almost the same. I can't think of them. They're like a junk removal company. Like they provide a huge amount of support to the veteran, which is just like having a fund behind you. Because a fund is going to, once they invest in your business, they're going to give you resources to make sure that business is successful because they've got a financial interest in making that. So while I don't have research, my guess would be that a franchise that specifically recruits military and understands what military needs would be a good starting point, because those people want you to succeed and they know what you bring to the table. So those are definitely something I think would be very complementary, or a lot of like an ETA fund as well.
Yeah, I think when you were talking about what are those characteristics of someone that's going to be successful in the ETA, I think there's probably, I would argue maybe there's some overlap with the same characteristics or qualities for those that would be successful operating a franchise, much to do with that military experience.
I think for sure those are definitely, again, but you got to pick the right one. And I would look, like I said, I would look for ones that do the active veteran recruiting, because there's a reason they've seen success in it. So they're going to go out and do it again, and they're going to provide you lots of support.
Yeah, and we've had a few of those come on to the podcast to talk about their franchises and how they want or why they want veterans to buy into their franchise. So I think that's a great point, Matt, on that.
We're going final two questions. So you're not a big podcast listener. Books though, what would you recommend? I mean, wide open aperture there for our listeners. Anything that you'd recommend, especially someone maybe transitioning out?
Oh man, I wish I had a bunch of good titles in my pocket. It's been so long since I've read something for enjoyment that I can't tell you. I'm so used to I've been reading for the last 2.5 years. I've been reading nothing but methodology articles. I read a book. It was about it was like unleashing. I forget the name of it. I'll have to look it up for you. But it basically talked about like some trauma stuff, like fight, flight. There's everybody talks about fight or flight, right? But then there's also freeze, and there's another part of it that was great, and it really kind of explain like beyond those things, kind of how veterans deal with trauma. It was about I love the Gladwell books, Outliers, great book, probably one of the best books I've ever read.
All right, Greg, the last question. So our final question is Admiral William McRaven authored the book, Make Your Bed, Little Things That Can Change Your Life and Maybe the World. So do you make your bed every morning?
I do make my bed every morning. I agree with that. I think you find that people that have processes in place are much better business leaders because they have a system, right? Like they're not kind of all over the place. One of the things that I saw in the space world is you have these genius people that are so smart, but they can't focus because they're so, they're kind of all over this like mad scientist mindset, right? Where they're doing all kind of crazy, thinking about different problems. So I think people that have systems are able to focus a little bit better.
Greg, thanks so much for coming on here. And I know you got a hard backstop, but maybe we can have you back on when you're finished up with the PhD and recap that.
Yeah. Would love to come back and help support. And please, I'm on LinkedIn. Have anybody can find me. If anyone's listening, please reach out. Happy to answer any questions you have. If you're a veteran, I will do everything I can to get you where you want to go. I make no promises, but I can hopefully open some doors for them. And anybody on your audience, you too, anything you guys need, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask me.
Military One Percenters, whether you're brainstorming your first business idea, already running a company, or just curious about where to start, Dog Tags to Ownership is the place for you. Please hit that subscribe button to receive all new episodes. Also, if you know someone who has turned their dog tags into ownership, drop us a DM on social media or tag someone. We are always looking for new guests to bring onto the podcast. And as always, Military One Percenters, thank you for your service. Let's continue this journey and working together to write our next chapter. Until next week, keep pushing to turn those dog tags into ownership.
From dog tags to ownership, heroes take the lead. Stories of veterans building trains with passion, drive, and speed. From service to success.